The Stingy Man and the Beautiful Lady. His name was Zedek. A tall, silent man with eyes that watched more than they spoke. He wore the same brown shoes for 10 years, polished until the soles begged for rest. People whispered stories about how he counted his coins before giving them to beggars, and how he once asked for change after donating to a church-building fund. Zedek was not poor. Far from it. He had businesses buried in places only papers could trace. He owned lands, buildings, and shares in companies nobody even knew he had an interest in. Yet he lived like a man who borrowed his own clothes. People feared him, not for violence, but for his silence and the tight grip he kept on everything he owned. No one thought he would ever marry. Who could live with a man who measured salt before putting it in soup? But then came Nira. She had a smile that stopped hearts, skin like evening milk, and a laugh that could turn a bad day into a festival. Every man wanted Nira. She was the jewel everyone longed to have but dared not reach for. But Zedek reached. And to the shock of the town, Nira said yes. No one could understand. Not her friends. Not her parents. Not even the stars. People thought she was joking. But Nira was serious. She said she saw something others did not. She said Zedek was more than his stinginess. That he had a heart that was simply locked. "I'll find the key," she whispered to her friend one night. "Love will open him." But love, as she would later learn, is not always loud. Sometimes, love is quiet pain. The wedding was small, not because they wanted it so, but because Zedek refused to pay for extra chairs. Their honeymoon was a trip to his backyard. No flights. No hotels. Just Zedek walking her around his garden while explaining how water bills increased if you watered flowers too much. Nira smiled through it. She believed. She held on to his promise. He told her on their wedding night, "I will build a world for you. Just wait. Tomorrow will be better." Tomorrow became months. Months became years. And better never came. Nira cooked with candlelight when he refused to fix electricity. She wore the same dress for special occasions because Zedek said, "What's the point? People forget clothes after one day." She gave birth to their first child, Narila, on a bed made of towels because Zedek said hospital beds were too expensive. Then came Jomal, their second daughter. Then Risa, the third. And finally, the child she prayed would bring change. Boaz, their son. Each time a child came, Nira hoped Zedek would change. That he would loosen his grip, let light into the house, let dreams be born. But the promises remained the same. "Next year," he would say. "When the market is better. When the stock rises. When. Always when. Never now." But Nira stayed. Not because she was weak, but because she was strong in a way the world no longer understood. She believed. She cried, but she believed. She wanted her children to have a father, even if the father was a man whose heart was wrapped in chains. The world mocked her. "How can a woman like you live with a man like him? You're too beautiful for this kind of life. She's wasting away." But Nira would smile and say, "Love is not a straight road. It has thorns. It has hills. But it still leads somewhere." Where was it leading? That answer was far away, hidden in a twist of fate that even the heavens did not see coming. Nira held Boaz to her chest as the night crept in. The room was cold again. The firewood had finished, and Zedek said it was too late to buy more. He didn't believe in heaters. "Fire burns money," he had said once, when Nira begged him for warmth during a storm. Boaz shivered, his tiny fingers clinging to Nira's hair. She kissed his head gently, whispering the same lullaby her mother once sang to her. Her voice cracked halfway. Not from the cold, but from exhaustion. A deep, silent exhaustion that made her bones feel older than her years. Zedek walked in, his face calm, his hands behind his back. He did that often. Hiding his hands. Like the secrets he always buried. "I have a new plan," he said without greeting. Nira looked up, waiting. There's a land I want to buy. Very cheap now, but it will grow in value. If I invest right, we can move into a better place soon. She didn't ask when. She knew better. Zedek never gave dates. Only hope stretched out like old chewing gum. Long, tasteless, and without meaning. Still, she smiled. That's good. He nodded, satisfied with her approval, and left the room without holding Boaz, without asking about the children, without even noticing that his wife hadn't eaten all day. The next morning, Nira rose before dawn. She packed Narila's bag, braided Jomel's hair, wiped Risa's nose, and rocked Boaz back to sleep. Her days were measured in needs and her nights in silence. She no longer dreamed. One afternoon, she asked Zedek if they could paint the house. The walls had grown dull, and the cracks were starting to spread like veins. Paint doesn't feed anyone, he said, sipping tea brewed from reused leaves. Then can we fix the leaking roof? He paused, calculating. Let the rainy season end first. Water won't hurt you. It's just water. Nira didn't cry anymore. Her tears had dried the day she realized crying only made her eyes heavier. She watched as her friends left her life one by one. Invitations stopped coming. Calls reduced. Everyone believed she had made her bed and should lie in it. But one evening, something strange happened. Zedek returned home looking disturbed. He had lost a business deal. A big one. He didn't say how much. He never did. But his eyes betrayed him. He sat in the kitchen, alone, and Nira approached him quietly, carrying a cup of warm rice water. He looked up, surprised. You're not angry? She shook her head. Why would I be? I've failed, he whispered. All my plans. They're all falling apart. She knelt beside him and said something he never forgot. If you fail, we'll start again. If you fall, I'll help you up. I didn't marry you for gold. I married you for the man I believed was hiding behind these locked hands. For the first time in years, Zedek cried. Not loud. Not wild. Just a single drop, sliding down his cheek. But Nira saw it. And her heart whispered, maybe, just maybe, love is not lost after all. He looked at her, then their children asleep on the mat, and something in him cracked. Not open yet, but cracked. Still, the stinginess continued. Promises still floated. But that night, Nira saw a tiny door creak open in his heart. And she kept holding on. Nira watched the bread seller pass again that morning. The sweet scent of freshly baked loaves filled the air, teasing her nose. Narila tugged her wrapper. Mama, can we have bread today? Nira smiled and bent down. Not today, sweet pearl. We'll have it on your birthday. But my birthday just passed. I know, Nira said softly. Then we'll have it on Boaz's birthday. Narila nodded, her innocent heart believing every word. That was the art Nira had mastered, painting hope where there was only absence. She turned water into soup, laughter into shield, and hunger into silence. Zedek passed by them just then, holding a file tightly to his chest. He didn't notice their conversation. He never did. He believed food was food, no matter what kind. He once said eating bread too often spoils the tongue. That same man had over 500 million in an account he hadn't touched in 5 years. Nira didn't care about millions. She would have traded it all for a warm plate of food, shared together, without calculation. That evening, Jomel returned from school in tears. Her slippers had broken again. She had stitched it 3 times with needle and thread. The teacher made her sweep the whole compound for wearing raggedy things. Nira's heart burned, but her voice remained calm. Zedek came home and found them gathered on the mat. He walked past, poured himself water, then sat near his ledger, his most trusted companion. Zedek, Nira said gently. He didn't answer. His eyes were deep in numbers. She moved closer. Can we buy new slippers for Jomel? He finally looked up. How many times will I buy slippers? Children grow fast. It's wasteful. They're still girls. They need to feel cared for. He frowned. They eat, don't they? That's care. Neera sighed. Sometimes care is not food. It's attention. It's presence. It's love. Zedek scoffed. Love doesn't pay bills. No, she said. But love makes bills bearable. He stood, annoyed. We'll talk tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. Again. Later that night, as Neera mended the slippers herself by candlelight, she whispered to herself, if love was money, I'd be a beggar. She didn't know that Boaz was awake, watching her from the shadows. His eyes were wide open, too young to understand the pain, but old enough to feel it. Days passed, and Neera's skin lost its glow. Not because of age, but because love, when one-sided, becomes heavy. Her beauty still lived, but now buried beneath sacrifice. She smiled less, laughed only when necessary, and stayed up late teaching the children the difference between having nothing and being nothing. One day the children asked, Mama, why don't we have visitors like others? Neera hugged them close. Because not all homes are loud. Some are just quiet. They believed her. But the truth was, people avoided them. No one wanted to visit a house where the man was colder than winter. Still, Neera endured. She prayed every night in secret. Not for wealth, but for change. Not for miracles, but for meaning. And every time Zedek made a promise, whether to buy new clothes, fix the roof, or take them on a short trip, she nodded, knowing the words had no wings. But she stayed. Because she believed a woman's strength is not in how much she gets, but in how much she can give, without losing herself. And one night, while the children slept, and the candle melted down to nothing, Neera looked at her reflection in the window. I'm not weak, she whispered. I'm just in love with a man who hasn't learned how to give. She didn't know then that love, no matter how wounded, sometimes plants seeds that grow in secret. And hers was already growing, quietly, slowly, deep in the heart of the man who had everything, but didn't know how to share it. Zedek always walked with precision, left foot first, arms tucked, face unreadable. But that morning, his steps faltered. Not much. Just a small drag. Neera noticed. She watched him from the doorway as he tied his shoelaces slowly, like someone unsure of his next move. He didn't greet. He rarely did. But this time, he paused and looked at her. Really looked. Do you want anything? He asked. Neera blinked. Not at the question, but at the voice. It lacked its usual edge. Slippers, she said carefully. For Jomal. And maybe some rice. He nodded once, without promise, and left. Neera didn't believe anything would change. She had heard many nods before. But something did change. That evening, Zedek returned with a small bag. Inside were pink slippers and 1 tin of rice. The children screamed with joy. Neera didn't. She stood still, watching him with eyes full of quiet confusion. Why now? She asked later, when they were alone. He shrugged. The stock market is bad. I figured, what's the use of saving coins if the world can burn them anyway? Neera said nothing. She simply touched his arm, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't move away. That night, she served rice with laughter. The children danced. Boaz tried to walk without holding anything. Narila made a paper crown for Zedek and called him Daddy King. Zedek chuckled. Not loud. But the sound existed. The next day, he went back to his usual silence. No slippers. No rice. No crowns. As if the joy had expired overnight. But Neera had learned something. Zedek was not heartless. Just broken. No one had ever taught him how to love. Not as a boy. Not as a man. His father, according to stories Neera heard once from an old aunt, used to lock meat away and eat it in secret. His mother only smiled when there were visitors. Zedek was raised among things, not feelings. Now, he was a man rich in wealth, but poor in warmth. Neera's heart softened, not in pity, but in understanding. She began to do little things. Leave warm tea by his chair. Write short notes on his files. You are more than numbers. At first, Zedek ignored them. Then he folded them carefully. Then he started waiting for them. Still, he remained tight-fisted. The house was the same. The clothes were the same. The promises, unchanged. But now, there were tiny cracks in the iron. One evening, Boaz fell sick. Badly. The kind of fever that makes a mother's soul ache. Zedek wanted to give him herbs. Neera refused. "We're going to the clinic," she said firmly. "It's expensive," he replied. "I don't care." Zedek hesitated. Then, for the first time, he took money out of his drawer, without arguing. Boaz recovered in 3 days. And Zedek. He sat by the boy's side every night, watching him breathe. On the 3rd night he said, "I'm scared, Neera." "Of what?" "Losing what I never held properly." She took his hand. "Then hold us now. There's still time." And in that moment, something shifted. Zedek, the man who could count his coins in his sleep, could not count the value of what he almost lost. From that day, he started coming home earlier. He started asking the children about school. He started saying, "Good night." He still didn't change completely. Not yet. But the iron was no longer solid. It was warming. And Neera, the woman who had endured for so long, began to see faint light behind the walls she once thought were unbreakable. It was Risa's 7th birthday. Neera hadn't planned much, just a bowl of beans, a warm bath, and the song she sang for each child every year, even when they were too young to understand it. The house was unusually quiet that day. Zedek had gone out early, saying nothing about where he was headed. Neera didn't ask. She had learned to let his silences pass like slow clouds. As evening approached, Risa stood by the window with a faded ribbon in her hair, looking out as though expecting something magical to arrive. "Mama, will Papa come back today?" she asked. "Yes," Neera said with a soft smile. "He always comes back. But will he come with something this time?" Neera knelt and kissed her cheek. "Let's be grateful for his coming. That's already something." But her heart ached. She still remembered the first birthday after marriage. She had made a card with pressed leaves for Zedek. He stared at it and said, "Why waste paper for a feeling?" That day, she learned not to expect gestures. Only words. And even those came like rain on a desert. Rare, brief, dry. The sun had nearly set when the door creaked open. Zedek entered, holding a brown paper bag. All 4 children rushed to him, eager. He stood frozen for a moment. Then slowly, awkwardly, he reached into the bag and pulled out a small red box. "Risa," he said, eyes on the box. "This is for you." The room froze. Even Neera dropped the spoon in her hand. Risa walked forward with cautious steps, her eyes big and uncertain. She took the box, opened it, and gasped. Inside was a tiny bracelet. Shiny. Simple. Beautiful. The other children screamed with joy. Risa ran to her father and hugged his legs tightly. "Thank you, Papa." Zedek stood there, stiff as a tree, unsure what to do. Then, slowly, he patted her back. Once. Twice. Neera watched with trembling lips. Later that night, when the children had gone to bed, she touched his hand gently. That was kind. Zedek didn't meet her eyes. It was cheap. She smiled sadly. It was love. He said nothing, but his silence didn't bite this time. It breathed. From that day on, things began to shift again. Slightly. Unevenly. Zedek started eating dinner with the family. Still quiet, still calculating, but present. He brought home fruits once a week. Not always ripe, but it didn't matter. It was the thought that mattered now. He even fixed the broken leg of Boaz's chair without being asked. One evening, Nera returned from fetching water and found Zedek sweeping the front yard. She dropped her bucket. "Are you?" He shrugged. "The children deserve clean ground." That night, Nera sat beside him in silence. Not out of emptiness, but out of quiet companionship. The kind that didn't need filling. Still, money remained untouched. He had billions. Yet he lived as though saving the world by saving his accounts. But Nera no longer prayed for riches. She prayed for little moments like this. For small kindnesses. For warmth. And slowly her heart, once calloused by years of waiting, began to feel again. Zedek hadn't transformed. Not completely. But he was trying. And that, for Nera, was enough to keep going. Because sometimes, love is not a lightning strike. Sometimes it's a slow dawn, stretching across a dark sky. Please subscribe. The sun had risen harshly that morning. Not golden. Not soft. Just hot and angry. Nera stood by the window, watching the children dress themselves. Their uniforms were worn out. The colors had faded from blue to some uncertain shade between sorrow and sky. Jomel's shoe sole had peeled off again. She tried to fix it with tape. Nera turned away. She had done this for years, turned away from moments that broke her spirit. But this morning, something was different. Heavier. Zedek sat at the table, counting some foreign currency. She didn't know which country it came from anymore. There were so many. Money she had never touched. Not once. Not even on their wedding day. "Zedek," she said softly. He didn't look up. "The children's uniforms. They need new ones. I can patch the shoes again, but Narila's skirt is too short now." He flipped through his notes. "There's a thrift store nearby. You can find something cheap." She nodded, then whispered, "Can I have money for that?" He paused. That tiny pause that always came before a refusal. "There's leftover soup," he said instead. "You can manage it for a few days. I'll look into it next week." Her hands dropped to her sides. "You've said that for 7 months." Zedek looked up now, clearly irritated. "You think I'm not trying?" "I think you don't want to try," she answered, her voice firmer than she intended. He stood. "I've given this family everything." She laughed quietly. Not mockingly, but bitterly. "You gave us shelter, Zedek. Not comfort. You gave us food, but not joy. You gave us coins, but not care." He blinked, stunned. Nera continued. "I married you with nothing. I bathed your mother when she was dying. I sold my jewelry to pay for your cousin's debt. I watched my children wear torn shoes while you counted invisible futures." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't blink them away. "Zedek, do you even see me?" Silence. She turned, walked into the room, and began folding clothes. The children watched, unsure. She packed one small bag. Not much. Just a wrapper, Boaz's blanket, and a worn copy of a children's hymn book. She stepped out. Zedek stood at the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice shaking. "Somewhere with peace," she said. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not. I'm tired." He didn't move. But she saw his fingers twitch. Then came his whisper. "You can't leave." "I can. And I will. Not because I hate you, but because I've started to forget who I am." He moved aside slowly, almost as if testing her resolve. She walked past him, got to the gate, held the latch, but didn't open it. Instead, she turned. "Tell me, Zedek," she said, voice soft but sharp. "If I walk away now, would you chase me, or count the savings I didn't take?" Zedek said nothing. She waited. Then, just when she turned back to the gate, "I bought land in your name," he said suddenly. She froze. "I did it last month. And shares. And insurance for the children. Everything's in your name. I just never told you. She turned slowly. Why? Because I was afraid that if I gave you everything, you'd realize you never needed me. Her mouth parted, but no words came. Zedek stepped closer. You think I don't love you, Nira. But I do. I just love in strange ways. And I'm learning. Slowly. Painfully. She dropped the bag. Walked past him. Straight into the house. She didn't speak for hours. But that night, she lay beside him on the mat. Not touching. Just close. And for the first time, Zedek reached for her hand. Not by accident. Not in his sleep. But on purpose. It rained all through the night, soft and constant, like heaven was washing the world gently. Nira couldn't sleep. Zedek's hand was still in hers. He didn't snatch it away, not even in sleep. That simple thing held more weight than all the promises he had ever made. She stared at the ceiling and wondered what kind of man hides his kindness so deep even he forgets it exists. By morning, the rain had stopped. The air was thick with wet soil and new beginnings. Zedek was already up, dressed in his usual beige trousers and plain shirt. But something about him looked different. Softer around the eyes. Less armored. He didn't say good morning. He never did. But he boiled water and placed 2 cups on the table. 2. For the first time, Nira drank tea with him. The children noticed it too. Narila whispered to Jomal, I think Papa is smiling small. Boaz, still too little to understand much, just giggled and tried to climb his father's leg. Zedek didn't push him away. Later that day, he handed Nira a folded document. What's this? She asked. School fees receipt. Paid in full. For all of them. She opened the paper slowly, as if afraid it might vanish like a dream. How did you? I sold one of my stocks. A minor one. She stared at him, shocked. You sold anything? He nodded. I want them to have more than I did. Nira looked at the paper again. Her fingers trembled. Not because of the money, but because it meant he had finally seen them. His own children, not as burdens, but as little humans with dreams and names and growing feet. That night, while brushing Narila's hair, Nira found herself humming. She hadn't done that in years. Zedek was outside, fixing the gate. He didn't know how, but he was trying. He had bought tools from a second-hand seller. The handle broke. He tried again. Nira watched from the window. She remembered the first time she saw him, alone at the back of a market square, counting his coins like a man who thought the sky might charge him for breathing. Everyone warned her. He is stingy. He is cold. He will bury your beauty in poverty. But she had seen something else back then. Not a monster, but a man fighting shadows. She just didn't know the shadows would become hers too. Still, she endured. She prayed. She wept into pillows. She went to bed hungry. She wore the same wrapper until the pattern faded into memory. But she stayed. Not because she was weak. Because something in her kept whispering, there's more to him. You just have to dig through the stone. And now the stone was cracking. One day, after dinner, Zedek called the children. All 4 sat on the mat, forming a wobbly circle. He cleared his throat. I bought a big house, he said. They screamed. Even Nira gasped. Where? Naila asked. He looked at Nira. You choose. Wherever you want. You name it. I'll make it our home. She stared at him, mouth parted. You're serious? He nodded. I want you to remember your strength. I want them, he gestured at the children, to know that everything I have will one day be theirs. Because you waited. You stayed when you could have left. And you never used it to shame me. Nira tried to speak, but her voice broke. He reached for her hand again. In front of the children this time. And Boaz, bless his innocent heart, clapped and said, Papa and Mama are best friends now. Laughter filled the room like music. Zedek laughed too. It wasn't much. But it was real. And that night, Nera slept, not as a beggar in her own home, but as a queen who had finally seen the crown she never asked for, placed gently on her head by a man who once forgot how to love. The new house stood tall, grand even, with whitewashed walls that reflected the morning sun. Its windows opened up to a view of rolling hills and endless skies. It was the kind of place people looked at in awe, as if it had always belonged to someone of wealth. But Nera knew the truth. This house had been built on more than just money. It had been built on years of silence, sacrifice, and small promises finally kept. Zedek had insisted on every detail. Not in his usual cold, calculative manner, but with a strange fervor of someone finally free from a cage they had built themselves. The walls gleamed with fresh paint, but Nera wasn't concerned with the luxury of it. She was more concerned with the changes she saw in him, the way he no longer counted every coin at the dinner table, the way he began to listen when she spoke, not just hear her words but understand them. For the first time in their marriage, Zedek came to her with questions instead of answers. "How do you want the children's rooms?" he asked one afternoon. Nera looked around at the empty rooms. The walls still smelled of fresh paint. The floorboards creaked with the weight of possibility. She thought of Narila's endless love for pink, of Risa's desire for books scattered across the floor, of Jomel's need for quiet corners. She smiled softly. "Make them as they want," she said, her voice warm. "But don't forget that a home is made of memories, not things." Zedek looked at her, as if hearing those words for the first time. He nodded and left her to arrange the children's rooms herself, but Nera noticed something different that evening. Zedek was home early. He hadn't disappeared into his study or on to business calls. He sat with her while she cooked, asking questions, making small talk, helping where he could. The children came home from school to find their rooms set up exactly as they had imagined. Narila's pink walls and window box of flowers, Risa's shelf overflowing with picture books, Jomel's corner filled with a desk and chair that actually fit him. They rushed from room to room, laughing and shouting in excitement. Zedek watched them with a look of deep satisfaction, as if the rooms held more than just furniture. For the first time in their marriage, Nera felt the kind of peace that she had only dreamed of. The house, though new, felt like home. The laughter of the children echoed through the halls, and Zedek was no longer a distant figure in the background, but a present father. That evening, after dinner, as they all sat together in the living room, Nera noticed a small glimmer in Zedek's eyes. He had leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, watching the children play. His face wasn't tight with worry anymore. It wasn't stern or calculating. For once it was just soft. "I should have done this sooner," he said quietly. "Please subscribe." Nera looked at him, unsure whether he was speaking to her or to himself. "You should have," she agreed, her voice gentle but honest. "But you didn't, Zedek. And I stayed. Because I believed that someday, you would." He met her gaze, the weight of the years they had spent apart from each other finally sinking in. "I didn't know how, Nera. I didn't know how to love." She nodded, understanding that this was the closest he would ever come to an apology. She didn't need more than that. She had waited for years, and now she could see that Zedek was starting to understand. As the children ran around, oblivious to the quiet exchange between their parents, Nera felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not the kind that was fragile or based on empty promises, but a steady, grounded hope that came from real change. The house wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of everything they had endured. Every day they had spent in silence. Every moment they had spent apart. Every dream that Nera had carried alone, quietly, in the dark. But now they were building a future together, brick by brick, not in material wealth, but in love, trust, and understanding. And in that moment, as the firelight flickered and the children's laughter filled the air, Nera knew that this house was more than a place to live. It was the home they had finally created, not from riches, but from the strength of their love and the healing of their brokenness. As the months passed, the house became more than just a home. It became a symbol of something deeper. The children grew, their laughter filling the halls every day, and Zedek, though still reserved in his own way, found ways to show his affection for Nira and their children. It was the small things, waking up early to make tea for her, sitting with Risa while she did her homework, repairing the fence without being asked. Nira had learned not to expect grand gestures. For years, she had prayed for a single act of kindness. And now, each small act felt like a victory. Zedek wasn't perfect. He wasn't the man she had dreamed of when she was young and full of hope. But he was a man who had changed. And that, she knew, was enough. Yet, despite the quiet shifts in their lives, something still lingered in the air between them. A heavy, unspoken question that neither of them dared to ask aloud. Would Nira ever truly forgive him for the years of neglect? Could a marriage survive on the strength of change alone? One evening, as the children played outside, Nira sat alone on the porch, her feet tucked beneath her. Zedek came out to join her, holding 2 cups of tea. He sat beside her in silence, his gaze distant as he watched the children run around. The weight of years without true conversation hung heavy between them. "How is it?" she finally asked, her voice soft. "How does it feel to be a father? To really be a father?" Zedek took a long sip from his cup before answering. "I don't know. I never really understood what it meant before. I thought providing for them was enough. But now I see it's more than that." He paused, looking at Nira for the first time in a long while. "I didn't know how to be the man you needed. I thought I could buy your love. I thought I could fix everything with money." Nira listened carefully, but her heart couldn't quite catch up with her mind. This wasn't the first time Zedek had admitted his mistakes, but this time, there was a tenderness in his voice that made her feel something she hadn't felt before: vulnerability. "You don't have to fix anything with money," she said quietly. "You only needed to be present. I needed you, Zedek. Not just your things, but you." The words hung in the air, thick with years of pent-up frustration. Zedek looked down, his fingers tightening around the cup. "I know," he whispered. "I wish I could go back. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. All I can do now is try to be the man you deserve." Nira turned toward him, her heart heavy with the weight of all that had been left unsaid for so long. She wanted to forgive him. She wanted to heal the years of hurt. But forgiveness wasn't as simple as it seemed. "You don't have to be perfect, Zedek," she said. "You just have to be here. That's all I ever wanted." But even as she spoke, she knew that something still lingered. She had loved him through the years of silence, through the empty promises. But could she truly forgive the man who had made her feel invisible for so long? Zedek reached over, taking her hand. His fingers trembled slightly, as though he wasn't sure how to make the connection that had once felt so natural. Nira looked down at their hands, the old wounds still fresh but slowly healing. She knew there was still work to be done. There would always be work to be done. But for the first time in a long time, she felt the faint stirrings of something she had almost forgotten, a sense of peace. A sense that, perhaps, they could rebuild not just their home, but their hearts. And though forgiveness was a journey, it was one she was ready to take. For him. For her. For them. The wind that day carried the scent of something distant, like change. Nira stood by the window of their new home, watching the clouds pass slowly across the sky. It had been nearly a year since they moved in. The children were taller. Boaz had started speaking in full sentences. And Zedek. He had softened, truly softened. But peace, Nira had learned, is a fragile thing. And sometimes, it comes wrapped in a new kind of silence. It started when she noticed him slipping out at odd hours. Zedek was not a man of secrets. He had once been predictable to the point of pain. But now, he would take long walks with no explanation, often returning with something on his mind, something he wouldn't speak about. One day, while cleaning his old wooden desk, the one he never let her touch, she found it. A drawer. Locked. She almost left it alone. Almost. But something inside her burned with curiosity, with caution, with fear that maybe all this peace had been built on another kind of lie. She found the key taped under the drawer. Inside were letters. Stacks of them, written in Zedek's handwriting. Some addressed to her, some to each of the children. The paper was old. Some were yellowed, dated from years back. Before the house. Before the change. With trembling hands, Neera opened the one addressed to her. Neera, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if I'll ever be man enough to give it to you. But I write this because I must say what I cannot speak. I see the way you look at me, like a woman trying to love a wall. You are beautiful in ways I do not understand, and I am scared of losing control. Scared of needing anyone. I punish myself with silence. I punish you with it too. I know this. And yet, I cannot stop. If I ever change, if I ever become better, please know that it was your patience that saved me. Not my will. Not my strength. Yours. You endured me, Neera. And one day, I will find a way to repay you. I promise I will. She sat there, the letter trembling in her fingers, her heart too full to beat. Tears came, slow, hot tears that had waited for years. Not because of what was written, but because it was proof. Proof that he had known. That he had felt. That he wasn't just a cold machine. He had struggled with his own walls, his own demons, just like she had struggled to reach him. By the time Zedek returned that evening, Neera had read all the letters. He stood in the doorway, eyes scanning her face, sensing something had changed. You opened the drawer, he said quietly. I did. He nodded. I meant to tell you. I didn't know how. She held the letter in her hand. Why didn't you ever give them to me? I was ashamed, he said. I thought words wouldn't be enough after all I failed to do. So I kept them, waiting for the right moment. But it never came. Neera stood, walked to him, and placed the letter on his chest. This, she said, voice thick with emotion, is more than you ever gave me when I needed it most. But now that I have it, now that I know you tried, even if only on paper. She looked up at him, her voice shaking. I forgive you. Zedek's eyes widened. Moisture gathered there, something Neera had never seen in them. Tears. And in that moment, no wealth could match what passed between them. Not the house. Not the stocks. Not the cars he rarely drove. It was two wounded hearts, finally meeting in the middle. They embraced, and for the first time since the day she married him, Neera felt safe, not in walls or riches, but in the arms of the man who had once been a stranger in her own home. Please subscribe. The air was still that morning, unusually quiet. Even the birds seemed to hush, as though the world itself knew something important was about to unfold. Zedek sat at the edge of the bed, older now, thinner too. His once sharp voice had grown slow and deep, like a drum being beaten from afar. Neera stood by the window, arms folded gently across her chest, watching him with quiet worry. He had been falling ill more often, headaches that came with no warning, chest pains that whispered of time slipping away. But Zedek never complained. He faced death the way he had once faced life, with silence and sternness. Except now, he had no walls left to hide behind. One day, he called Neera and the children into the living room. All four, Narila, Risa, Boaz, and Jamira, sat in a row on the couch. They were teenagers now, each with the quiet elegance of their mother and the piercing gaze of their father. Zedek, wrapped in his warm grey shawl, cleared his throat and looked at them with eyes that were filled not with power, but peace. I need to tell you all something, he began, voice trembling like old paper. Neera reached for his hand and held it tightly. I'm not going to live forever. And I'm not afraid of that anymore. But I've spent most of my life being afraid of giving, of loving, of trusting. And in that fear, I hurt the woman who gave me everything, your mother. The children exchanged silent glances, their eyes soft but alert. I want you to know that everything I have, everything I ever built, is now hers. All of it. The estates, the stocks, the properties. Not because she asked for them, but because she earned them in ways the world will never understand. Narila's eyes widened. Risa gasped. Boaz looked up slowly, stunned. Jemira blinked in disbelief. Zedek continued, his hand gripping Nira's. She stayed with me when I was unlovable. She raised you when I was absent. And she never once used my name to boast or beg. She is stronger than any man I've ever known. Nira's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to tell him not to say such things, but the truth was too loud. It filled the room, pressing down on them like the weight of old tears. I've prepared the documents, Zedek said. Everything has been signed. When I leave this world, my legacy goes to her, and through her, to you. Risa whispered, Papa, are you dying? Zedek looked at her, smiling gently. No more than any man who loves deeply for the first time. That night, the house was silent again, but not from pain. It was the silence of healing, of a story completing its arc. Weeks passed. And then, Zedek passed quietly in his sleep. No pain. No noise. Just a man who had finally learned how to rest. Understood. The funeral was small. No grand speeches. Just a few whispers of the man he had become. Few knew the full story. Only Nira and her children understood what he had once been, and how far he had come. When the lawyer read the will, the room fell silent once more. It was all true. Zedek had left everything to Nira and their children. Billions in value. Estates across the hills. Stocks in companies no one knew he even invested in. Antique cars tucked away in quiet garages. Lands. Treasures. Shares. The man who had once refused to buy new slippers for his wife had handed her the keys to an empire. The world was stunned. Newspapers whispered about it. Reporters tried to dig into the mystery of this unheard-of woman named Nira. Who was she? How did she earn the wealth of a man so quiet, so stingy, so rich? But Nira gave no interviews, no speeches. She simply lived, raised her children, breathed freely for the first time in years. And each night she would sit by the window and whisper, "You kept your promise, Zedek, even if it took you a lifetime." Years passed like quiet waves on a shore. Nira aged gracefully, her beauty untouched by time. Not the kind of beauty that came from powder or perfume, but the kind that rose from deep inside, like firelight glowing behind tired eyes. The children had grown. Narila became a scholar, quiet and brilliant, always reading, always thinking. Risa traveled the world, writing poems in strange languages. Jemira stayed close, running a foundation in her father's name, one that helped women who endured in silence. Boaz, the only boy, took over the estate, not with pride, but with humility. The house was always filled with warmth. Laughter echoed from the halls. Zedek once walked in silence. And though he was gone, his presence never truly left. His portrait hung above the fireplace, not because Nira asked for it, but because Boaz insisted. "He may have been late, Mama," he'd say, "but he arrived." Nira smiled often, but it was a different kind of smile. One that held both joy and sorrow in equal measure. A woman who had seen the worst of love, and still believed in it. People still whispered her name in curiosity. That's the woman who got it all from the stingy billionaire. She must have known what she was doing. Maybe she bewitched him. How can a woman suffer and still smile like that? But they never understood. They didn't see the nights she cried alone, praying he would simply ask if she was okay. They didn't hear the silence that stretched for years across their marriage, the kind that bruises more than fists. They didn't feel the ache of being unloved while sleeping next to a man every night. No, they only saw the ending. They never saw the middle. One evening, Nira sat under the tree Zedek had planted for her long ago, a tiny thing that had once looked like a twig. Now it was tall and strong, just like their children. In her hands, She held one of his old letters. The paper was worn from being read too many times. If I had known then what I know now, I would have loved you faster. But maybe love, the kind that survives death, doesn't need to be fast. Maybe it only needs to be real. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she smiled. Real. That was the word she had waited for her whole life. She had married a man who could not love. She had stayed when it made no sense. She had endured what others would have fled. Not for gold. Not for houses. Not for children. But for the hope that one day she would be seen. And in the end, she was. Not just as a wife. Not just as a mother. But as a woman who waited, and endured, and won. Because sometimes, the quietest women have the loudest victories. And Nira? She won without shouting. Without revenge. Without rage. She won with silence. With patience. And in the end, she became the woman who owned it all. Not just the wealth, but the legacy. Please subscribe to the channel, like and drop your comment on the comment section, and don't forget to press the notification button for more amazing story like this. The end.